now it's all false. Now it's all bullshit. Now you've unraveled, you've hit a moral dilemma. I think that's how I describe the process. I think it's a moral dilemma. I think you hit a point, a crossroads, where you are presented with information that you cannot deny, that you can't cognitive dissonance your way out of, and you have to deal with it. And when you have to deal with it, you suddenly realize there's a lie, there's deception, there's a problem here that I never, ever expected to have out of this group or leader.
The proceeds of this monetized episode are going towards I Am Dying Out Loud. Find out more in the description. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having you on the channel or the podcast, whoever is listening or watching this on whichever platform. So I found your channel a couple of weeks ago while I was just doing a YouTube deep dive. And I just thought your backstory and the premise of your channel was just so cool. And it was a lot of your content really, I felt like, resonated with the same audience or questions my audience has been asking or topics they've been wanting to cover. And I just thought it would be really fantastic to kind of do a crossover and have you on mine as well, just to get to know you and chit chat a little bit. And everybody seems to like you, so that's good.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that there's some appeal in the direction of, to be blunt, your demographic, because I tend to have ex-cult members and older demographic, which I'm not at all complaining about, but it's nice to get some attention in the other direction sometimes, because I really think that this material that I'm trying to talk about and help others talk about is incredibly relevant to everybody these days.
Yes.
I really can't think of a demo that it doesn't apply to.
Right. And I think what channels like yours are doing is they're making the demographic that you might typically think my audience would be. They're making us understand we were also raised in cults, in very strict, like unacceptable environments and things like that. So I feel like for every benefit that a new audience can do your channel, you can actually do that audience a benefit and kind of help them wake up and understand the way that you were raised is not normal and there was a problem, but we can fix it if we start now. And so, with our powers combined, I feel like we can make a difference.
Well, I certainly hope so. Hope so.
And I was very fascinated to find out that you were actually a Scientologist. When I first got introduced to your channel, I was just watching the videos and I didn't realize that you yourself were involved in Scientology. So how does one go from being involved in a group like that to studying how people get involved in groups like that?
Oh, well, for some of us, it's a very automatic, almost a mission at first.
Yeah. Yep.
There's a burning question that occurs to people who are thinking a lot, and I think a lot, maybe too much. I'm certain. I mean, really, I sometimes wonder about that. But because you find a whole spectrum of people get involved in cults, and a whole spectrum of people leave cults. So everybody's not the same,
right?
And it's the cult that tries to treat everybody the same.
Yes. Yeah.
You get out.
Right? Already dropping bombs like this, and we're like 5 minutes in.
Exactly. So, so that's for me, it was 10 years ago that I escaped Scientology, got out of Scientology, found out the truth about it. And I had grown up in it. I'd been part of it for my entire life. I'd actually worked for the organization and spent 25 years working for the church.
Yeah.
So it was a very big adjustment coming out and starting to, when I came out, I wanted to continue doing Scientology. I actually didn't have completely bad feelings about it and have to run out in the middle of the night or jump over a fence or something. I tried to go with the flow and be a good Scientologist and continue to do Scientology. In other words, be in good standing with the church, not be a suppressive person, right? Not be a bad guy. And that quickly devolved into, I got to get away from this stuff as quickly as possible after about 3 months of deep diving on the internet. I had access to the internet as an outside public Scientologist that I never had when I was a staff member working for the church.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, they definitely prohibit, and there are physical barriers, security barriers. They'll, for example, they will on the Sea Org base where I worked in Los Angeles, the big blue buildings, which has big Scientology symbol, and most people see that, think Scientology. That's where I lived, and
wow,
that was 17 years is working there, and they had, at the last years that I was there, I left in 2012, at the end of 2012, they were just putting in, they had just for about a year had Wi-Fi for the base, and it was filtered.
What?
So
I had no idea. I'm learning so much already. I didn't even know people lived there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a base. It's treated like, and we acted as though it was a military base. We used terminology like that. It was a paramilitary setup. This is the billion-year contract people. This is the fully in. That was me, and I was all in. So we had filtered internet. It was like China. It was like you can't find certain things. It doesn't matter what way you try to get around it. If you're looking for Xenu, you ain't ever going to find it. If you're looking for Leah Remini, you're not going to find her. Like, that's just not there.
Wow.
And, so having gotten out, I had unfiltered access, and I'm a curious person. And so I started looking, and one thing led to another. And after about 3 months, my entire life unraveled. So seeing that situation for what it is, right, which is really awful.
Yeah.
I had a very big burning question, which sort of drove me for quite some time, which is, what the hell happened to me?
Yeah.
There were two questions. There was, what the hell happened to me? And how do I make absolutely sure that this never happens to me again?
Yes. Right? Yes.
So that was what impelled me to be very curious in Google. And I was just getting into Google and just getting into the internet. This is 2012. Like, I was really behind. But I'm really kind of learning about this stuff. And I found meetup.com, and it was like, what? I can find friends outside the church because I lost, everybody.
Yeah.
And once I found out what was what, and I started speaking out, things got ugly pretty fast. By the end of 2013, I was declared a suppressive person, and that's persona non grata. No Scientologist will talk to you. You're disconnected. Lose all your Facebook friends. They're all gone overnight. I mean, it's quite stunning how quickly it happens.
Yeah.
So those questions were driving my behavior then, were driving my actions, right? Like, okay, what was this all about? How did this happen? How does this happen to people? And how do I talk about it so I don't, look like a moron, but also, how can I explain it to people? How do you your life? I mean, I was 42 years old when I got out of the Scientology and got out of the Sea Org. How do you condense all that experience into a way to explain it to people where they'll understand you weren't stupid. It wasn't about that. You weren't culpable. You weren't responsible.
No.
You were in a situation where premeditatedly, on purpose, your labor was taken advantage of, your energy, your affinity, your love, your care, your empathy became weaponized for this group. And that's, that sounds really nasty, and it kind of is. But it's what these groups do. They take in empaths, people who care about the world, people who want to make the world a better place, people who want to see change and believe it can happen. And not everybody believes that.
Right.
But the people who do, they can fall for these messages. I sure did. I grew up with it. So I knew that there was this hook and that there was this stuff that was going on there that was manipulative, but it took years. It took
I bet. Well, yeah, because what people don't understand is not only are you deconstructing, like still, it's not, you don't just wake up one day and go, I'm done with this. None of it matters. It's a process. And then at the same time, trying to explain things to people that maybe you don't even fully understand. You're like you said, I know I'm not dumb. I know that I didn't just like gullibly fall into something, but I also don't really know how to explain what did happen. It's just like any kind of coercive or abusive relationship. We see it happen all the time where it's like, why didn't you leave sooner? Why this? Why that? Why wasn't that a red flag? Why wasn't this red flag? Who knows, right? Who
Exactly.
knows?
Exactly.
That's wild. And so I'm guessing it was very scary to leave, most likely, or was it
Oh yeah, no, it definitely was. In fact, that was one of the reasons I stayed for so long. I mean, it was
yeah,
leaving Scientology for me, being a second generation, grown up in it,
yeah,
fully committed to it by 17 years old. I'm working for the church right out of high school. 25 years of working for the church. I mean, that was a long time, a lot of commitment, a lot of ups and downs. And at the end of that, I was like, well, I realized the benefits of being here. They feed me, they clothe me, they give me a place to live, to sleep.
you're
Uh,
describing
I have,
prison also.
yeah, I have a wife who loves
Yeah.
me. I love her, right? Kind of. I mean, it was kind of falling apart at the end, but um, it's a much longer story. But your world is the Sea Org,
Yeah.
Scientology core group, the
Yeah.
fanatical group, the guys who wear uniforms and stuff. Yes, sir. No,
Yeah.
sir. Hi, sir. Right. So scary is definitely a word to describe what
Yeah. Yeah.
terrifying.
A
And
million emotions, I'm sure.
oh, absolutely. And I didn't, and it was only actually, see, the funny thing is my parents raised me in it, and then they got out before I did. And I was in communication with them. They had not been declared suppressive or become bad people because they hadn't spoken out publicly against the church. They were just laying low,
Oh.
keeping quiet, not answering the phone, not going to services, right? That kind of thing. And they just kind of faded into the background. And lots and lots and lots and lots of Scientologists, that's what happens. That's how they
Yeah.
lead. They don't have to get up in the middle of the night and jump over a fence or something. They just stop taking the phone calls and stop paying for the services. That was my parents. And so by 2012, I was in touch with them and sort of communicating because I couldn't tell anybody around me my doubts, my concerns, my like, I don't think I want to be doing this anymore. I'm halfway through my life now, and I'm not happy. I made
Yeah.
everybody else around me happy. Everybody thinks I'm great. Everybody thinks I'm doing a good job, but I'm not happy. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of my mom actually then became my mainline support system because she said, well, and my dad independently as well said, well, we will support you in whatever you do. And if you need financial assistance or whatever, well, of course we're going to be here for you.
Yeah.
That was all I needed to hear. And
Yeah.
I wish I'd heard it 10 years before.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but at the same time, interestingly, years after I got out, my mom and I actually got on camera and did a whole interview and talk about all the missed opportunities over the years and
That's
why things
amazing.
went the way they did. It was really quite something. It was very
Right.
cathartic for both of us.
I imagine.
So,
And
yeah,
those are the kind of decisions that you can say all you want, like, "Oh, why didn't your parents get you out?" or this or that, the other. But it's one of those decisions where it really has to be that person's decision, their time, their pace, just like anything else, just like quitting an addiction, just like leaving an abusive person. You can tell that person a million and a half ways that they need to get out of that situation. And until they're ready and until it's their idea, it's not going to happen. And you might actually lead them deeper into staying in if you keep hassling them about it.
that's exactly right. And that was exactly what my mom was afraid of.
Yes.
And that's why we were always a little bit, it wasn't tense. I actually really relied on my parents and especially my mom, but the opportunities to call her, talk with her, the opportunities to see her were almost non-existent.
Yeah.
But the opportunities to call and speak with her weren't very frequent until the later years of my experience where I was sent out and I was out and about more often than I was on the base in Los Angeles. I was out in Minnesota, I was out in Kansas City, I was out in Portland, you know, various outlying churches doing projects. And that gave me opportunities with to have a cell phone and to have some freedom and access. And so I would use that to, you know, talk to my mom and things like that. So, you know, nothing, it was super nefarious stuff, right? Like talking to your parents.
Yeah.
So I always maintained that line, that tie with her, but it was never a line. You know, she could never say, "Well, look, I really think you should leave," because if she did, and then I changed my mind, that'd be it. I would have to disconnect from her, and that would be it. That's Scientology dogma. That's not, you know, some kind of, oh, maybe that might happen. That was absolutely going to happen.
Yeah.
So she wasn't going to do that, and that was the reason it took a bit longer. But in the end, it really worked out, and she was more than there for me, as was my dad, and things worked out really well for me in
amazing.
getting out of that situation.
Yeah. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a master's in psychology and coercive control, right?
Yes, that's correct. It's like there's a program offered out of the University of Salford in Manchester. That's my degree there on the wall, and it's a unique program which studies coercive control in domestic violence situations, in cult and group situations, and in trafficking situations across all three of those domains. We studied at a master's level what and how it occurs, the anatomy of it, broke it down, you know, compared and contrasted different you know, modalities of it, and how to recover from the experience was also part of our study. We didn't do formal counselor training. I'm not a therapist, but it was very educational.
I bet. And you said something a couple of times that I think is really interesting, and I want to address for a second, because you mentioned when you were getting out of Scientology, you were saying I didn't have to like jump over a fence, I didn't have to do these things, and with a lot of the stuff that you mentioned that degree covers, you know, domestic violence, leaving cults, trafficking. Hollywood has us picturing that we're not escaping a cult if we're not like jumping over a fence. We're not being abused if he's not, you know, backhanding us like they do in the movies. And like trafficking, you know, they think, oh, a girl gets grabbed and thrown in a van and never seen again. When sometimes these coercive tactics, especially in cults, are simply, man, your grandma would be so disappointed if she found out that you were thinking about leaving. Like it would literally just kill her if you left. Sometimes that's all it takes. Or everybody you know being like, if you left, like, we're not going to talk to you anymore. And thinking, I can either leave and wonder where I'm going to sleep, where I'm going to live, who I'm going to speak to, because everybody I know is involved in this thing, or I can just tough it out. I mean, it's just church, right? Like, I just sit here in this pew, right? And so I think it's so important to make that distinction, because just because you're not being backhanded or having to escape in the night or, you know, being thrown into a van doesn't mean that you're not experiencing these things, and you need to get out of them somehow, or find support to get out of them.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, for sure. Coercive control is a repeating pattern of abusive behavior, generally in a codependent relationship, is my thinking about it. Because the leader or the domestic partner or the gang leader or the trafficker needs the followers as much as the followers feel they need the leader. It goes both ways. And codependency is a good word to use to describe it, even though these are not always romantic relationships, and people tend to go there when you throw that word out. But it's isolation, manipulation, and control. That's your coercive control. That's how it works. So you isolate the individual, or, you know, the people involved, and you're manipulating them constantly through deception and through trickery and through euphoria inducing experiences, which tend to do the, you know, the back and forth of the rewards and the punishments. I mean, there's this whole anatomy to it. And my group, Scientology, is literally noted. I mean, if it has to have a claim to fame, right? As being one of the most coercive groups out there, because of the fact of the sheer volume of techniques and methods that are utilized in that group at so many different levels in so many different ways. to manipulate and deceive and control people. And they and I and my parents for a time and everybody I knew very much believed in this cause and concept that we were making the world a better place, that we were saving the world, that things were going to get better as a direct result of what we were doing. And that because we were doing it, the world had a chance. And if we were not doing what we were doing, it didn't have a chance. It was going to be over. And it was going to be over very quickly. In fact, the only reason it wasn't over yet is because of the work our forebears in Scientology had been doing, because it was around since 1950, right? So this was the thinking in the culture of Scientology, you know, cult culture, kind of concept, and that's where cult comes from, is that concept. So it was just very, very illuminating to be able to talk about these things with some degree of certainty after the experience. I'd been putting a lot of things together for a lot of years as a YouTuber, as an author, as a content creator, as somebody who's trying to educate people while I was literally trying to educate myself and kind of do my recovery process. That's what I've always, at the end of the day, that's what my YouTube channel is it's a progress report on my recovery.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, really, you know, and the things I've learned along the way. And that degree sort of jump-started it in a way that gave me, that took away the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You know?
Absolutely. It gives weight to your opinion. You can be saying the exact same thing. You can be reading the exact same books. You can be reciting the exact same studies. But once you have those letters by your name, it just adds this weight and this importance to the same exact things you've always been saying.
Exactly. And that's all you really want out of it, other than the experience, of course, and the education, which is, you know, wonderful. I mean, to be honest, I'd studied cults for years. So a lot of the cult stuff I had already put together, but even there I was introduced to new modeling on cults. It's not just the bite model. There's models coming out your ears on cults. And also, though, relating everything also to the domestic violence sphere and to finding out and learning a lot more about human trafficking, and to the point where you can, you know, see movies like Sound of Freedom, this new one that's come out recently, and realize all the flaws, all the problems with it, and that it's great to raise awareness on that. And I'm very happy that's happening. But we have to kind of always, you know, realize that the message is sometimes taking you over here when the real picture is kind of actually different. And that's the case with that particular movie. Is I'm glad people are talking about it, but if that's all they know about human trafficking, they've got a very microscopically tiny idea of the actual problem.
Right. And that's another problem with kind of attacking topics like that, is there's so much, like we were talking before we officially went on the record, there's just so many nuances to these topics where it's like, if you want me to talk about it for 3 hours, I can, but wow, what direction am I going to go in? Because there's just so much on these things. And so it can almost be discouraging to try and tackle these topics and to raise awareness, because you're like, where do I even start? And like, if I do human trafficking, do I only focus in America? Do I only focus on the youth? Do I only focus on, you know, and then the next thing you know, you're like, you know what, forget about it. This is just a lot of work. It's a bad thing. We all know it, you know. When you were studying for your degree, did you end up reading things or learning things that, like, even in all of your studies and your research you had already done at that point, really opened your eyes to stuff that maybe you'd forgotten about, or you didn't realize you needed to look through a certain lens to recognize?
Yeah. There was something I was exposed to that absolutely shocked me. I thought I had been down the rabbit hole on Scientology, on the awful that people will do to one another when you go through, you know, when your life is this, when this becomes your thing, and you literally create a YouTube channel around it, you end up talking to a lot of people and interacting with sociologists and psychologists and neuroscientists and historians and people in lots of different places, as you find out more and more about different aspects of what's been done to you and what happens to people all the time, every day, ideologically, religiously, psychologically. And And I thought I'd kind of seen it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until one day I was introduced to something, a piece of work, a 1978 novel. I just pulled it up here so I could remind myself.
Write this
It
down.
was called The Turner Diaries. And this was a fictional novel published by a guy named William Luther Pearson. These are probably some of the most racist stories. Like, it's a story about a race war and the necessity of it, and how all the minorities need to be rounded up and killed, and blah blah
What?
blah. It's horrifying. It's really bad.
Yeah.
It's racist literature
Yeah.
from a person who was incredibly smart as an individual. I think he was a physicist or something by training, and then he got radicalized and became a full-time racist. Literally,
Wow.
that was his thing. He started a radio program, and he wrote these serialized stories. And I'm only bringing this up because it's not, I mean, people know about this here and there, but I had never heard of it. And
No, I've never heard of that.
I didn't, I had been familiar with neo-Nazis to the degree that they exist, and they engage in, various ritualistic and occult and violent practices that are not, savory stuff. And that's about as much as I dive down that rabbit hole. But the rabbit hole of racism in the United States is very, very, very deep.
It
And
goes all the way to the core,
yeah,
all the way to the
I'll tell
magma
you,
down in the middle of the earth.
nasty stuff, nasty. And people like William Luther Pierce are exemplify that. This is one of the very worst human beings who ever lived. This guy who imagined this whole thing and propagated these messaging. And like I said, this happened in my lifetime. I'd never even heard of it, didn't know anything about it, and was stunned, just absolutely stunned by it. It really left me for a day. I was almost speechless. And I'm not that kind of guy. I've seen and heard some pretty crazy things. I was in Scientology for decades. Believe me, I've seen some crazy crap, right?
When you shock a Scientologist,
yeah,
you're shocking.
It's kind of hard because the only reason I say that is because you're exposed to an awful lot of people's secrets in Scientology. And so I learned things about how people get along and behave and all that are kind of unsavory in certain ways.
Yeah.
But this was a whole different level. And since you asked, I just thought that's the first thing my mind went to was this nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wild.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because even though cults come from so many different places, religions in general come from so many different places, they share so many of the same coercion tactics. And
Oh, yeah.
I liked earlier that you talked about the cult being something that was done to you, or the group that you're leaving being something that was done to you, because especially on platforms like mine, I speak to a lot of evangelical Christians or former evangelical Christians. And one of the hallmarks of a lot of American Christian religions is blaming you for everything that's going wrong with your spiritual life. If you're not getting responses to your prayers, you're not praying enough. You're not pleasing God. You're doing something wrong. How is your walk with the Lord? This and that and the other. And I'm so glad that you pointed out, no, this is something that happens to you, especially people like you who you're in it because your parents are in it, right? Like, I've even had pastors on here who talk about how they believe what they believe because that's where they were raised. And if they were raised somewhere else, they'd probably believe something else, right? And they are still pastors. And I think about that all the time. Like, I was a Baptist. I can't fathom being raised anything else because of where I was, right? And so I thought that was just like a really important thing to highlight. It is a thing that is done to you, that happens to you. It is not your fault. It is not because you were dumb. It is not because you fell for something or were gullible. You are literally taught, some of us from the moment we're born, that this is what you're supposed to do. So why would you question it, especially when all the people you love and you look up to and you respect are heavily involved in the same thing?
You nailed it. That's exactly right. The blame the victim approach is classic cult conditioning. And it was rampant in Scientology as much as it was in every group you spoke of there in the evangelical communities. It's a part of human control to guilt trip somebody, to shame and blame them into behaving the way you want them to. And if they accept that shame and blame and direct responsibility for everything that's ever happened to them ever, which we were told to do in Scientology, that the ultimate spiritual awareness and enlightenment was a state where you were ultimately responsible for everything that's ever happened to you. And this extends out to other people where, in a way, Scientologists are able to connect the dots to a baby being born with congenital heart disease, and somehow that being the spiritual entity, it's that the which they call a thetan in Scientology, by the way. It's the thetan's fault. It's, it's somehow
Yeah.
karmic, or there's some kind of other kind of thing. Scientologists don't do karma, but they kind of do. It's a similar concept. So this is an incredibly powerful control mechanism, and you find it used outside of religious settings as well. As long as you can get the person in a frame of mind where they're the ones who are supposed to be in the driver's seat. Their life is determined by their actions, their faith, their honor, their purity, whatever term is used to it becomes an impossible standard to ever achieve, but you're constantly striving for it. And that striving is the energy you're exerting, investing more and more into the cult.
Yeah.
So it's really using your emotions and really some very basic emotional needs in an incredibly corrupted way. And
Yes.
yet we find this behavior common across these groups.
Yes.
It's and I could regale you for hours with the exact ways and teachings that those things happen in Scientology, but I really think it's just it's just the same. You're imbued with ultimate power so long as you kiss the ring, so long as you do what I tell you, you will be infinitely free, and the world will be amazing, and everything will be exactly as you want it. Just submit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know,
they
yeah,
and they do a great job also of making sure that you see people who that's working for, like the infamous Mary Kay pink car. Everybody knew somebody who drove that Mary Kay pink car,
yeah,
and so Mary Kay's like, yeah, and maybe one day you too can have that pink car, just keep selling. And I feel like religions do the same thing. There's always those members who really just seem to have it together. They seem happy. Their relationship with their spouse seems amazing. They followed all the rules. They have all this money and these beautiful kids or whatever.
yeah.
And so you're thinking, okay, clearly this is accessible. I'm just doing it wrong. I just need to work harder and do better and be here longer hours or whatever it is that it takes to achieve that same result.
That's right. How has it been in your experience? Because in mine, in and out of Scientology, with other groups I've also encountered since, it seems that that imagery and the ideals that you're sort of instilled in you, and these perfect people who seem to be so well off and be such model examples of group X or cause X, almost uniformly, in fact, I will say uniformly, are false pictures. It's
Yes.
false imagery.
Yes.
You find out they're deeply in debt. Their kid's a drug addict. They're all these crazy things that they're absolutely storing.
Yes.
It's not just skeletons. It's mounds of skeletons in the closet.
Yes.
Has that been your experience too?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%, especially with the inclusion of stuff like Instagram, where in the 90s, it was the happy rich family. In the current day, it's the happy rich family with the Instagram mom and the social media family. They've
There it
got the
is. That's
YouTube
right.
channel. Yeah. And I think as a kid, because I grew up in a Baptist church, the weirdest part for me about deconstructing has been because I didn't feel like I was in a cult, because I saw people who were so much more religious or deeply, evangelical or fundamentalist. It's almost been weird finding out how much I actually was impacted by my faith. I started this because I was interested in talking to people who, had it worse or whatever, or were involved in these cults. But what you realize is so many microcosms of your everyday life are built around your religion. Even just little things like how at work people can say, "Oh, I'll pray for you. God bless." And nobody can say anything about it. But if somebody says, you know, I'll ask Allah to bless your family, it's like, whoa, hold on, like, don't, what are you doing, you know? And
That's right.
so that's kind of part of what I'm realizing about a lot of these perfect picture families is they actually were some of the worst families. They're the ones with the rampant sexual abuse or the deep debt, or maybe the dad is living his best life, but the mom is miserable because she hasn't gotten to leave the house since she had her first kid, and now she's 22 with 5 kids. Like, what are you know? And with the introduction of things like the internet, I read firsthand accounts on things like Reddit from these people who they're like, I bought into the whole get married at 19, have a kid, marry a pastor, do this, do that. And I am so miserable and I don't know how to get out. And I'm 25 and I don't know how I can possibly salvage this life, you know? And so
Yeah.
that's been the wildest part is I'm saddened and shocked, but not surprised by a lot of the things I hear from people who survived quote unquote, you know, cults to as what we know them to be. But I'm even more surprised by how much I was impacted by what I thought was a mild religious upbringing and how much people are impacted by the more passive, socially acceptable religious upbringings. That's probably been the most shocking part.
Well, it's an interesting and wonderful point you're bringing up because it's really important, and that is one I don't get to talk about very often. But in fact, I hardly hear anyone talk about this aspect of it. But it's really important to understand when evaluating a group or looking at situations, whether it's one-on-one culty kind of thing or Scientology or some other group or
Mhm.
whatever. It's one thing to realize is that this is a spectrum activity. This is not a
Yeah.
black and white binary. It's not, oh, it's a cult. It's not a cult. It's a little more culty. It's a little more culty. It's a little more culty. So, oh, wait a minute. Now we've passed a line where
Yeah.
it's become unacceptable. It's become either overtly abusive, it's sort of blatantly deceptive, in that you can figure it out and break it down and realize that they're not telling you the truth. And or there are levels of extremism in the belief. There's a level of commitment to the belief. In other words, that's what I mean by extremism is you're taking the belief so far into your personal sense of identity that you no longer, the degree you do that is the degree you're losing your ability to think critically about it.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
falling in love with it, is
Yes.
another way of putting it. It's a very similar chemical reaction. I'm pretty sure if you broke it all down and be like, oh yeah, it looks just like love,
Yeah.
that euphoric, trauma bonding thing. And that's a spectrum activity. So
Mhm.
so it doesn't have to be that you were in a group that's quote unquote officially a cult in order to recognize that there are culty things happening in the group you're in.
Yes.
That's a
100%.
such an important thing to get across to people because they
Yes.
think, oh, well, I'm safe because I'm going to my fill in the blank church. And I know that's not ever been called a cult or nobody's doing any culty stuff there. And they cease thinking about all the red flags they're seeing in that group that, oh, but it can't be a cult. And that becomes its own thought stopping cliche to shut down the thinking, to
Yes.
stop the
Yes.
criticism, right?
Absolutely. Because you think, especially as a Christian in America, you think because I didn't have hair to my knees and prairie dresses, it wasn't a
Yeah,
cult. You know, I was
right.
allowed to watch Veggie Tales. That's not a cult. It's like, surprise. Like,
Exactly.
you'll never look at cucumbers the same way again. I swear you won't. And
That's
and
right.
then there's the lasting impact too, where, for example, I was in college. I remember being a freshman in college, and I was older than most people my age. So we're talking like 19, 20 years old. And I remember being so paranoid that people were going to think I wasn't a virgin. I was still a virgin. I was still a virgin, but I remember thinking like, "Oh, if I'm caught hanging out with this guy too late, people are gonna think I have sex, and, like, they're gonna think we made out, or he's gonna be able to, like, tell people we made out when we didn't." And you're like, "Okay, a young girl's worried about that." But when you really think about it, it's because of what God's gonna think, or because they won't think you're a Christian. Like, it was all Christian based when you really dive into like, why did I care? It's just asking yourself why over and over again. Like, what are you worried about? I'm afraid they're not going to think I'm a virgin. Why? Because that means I had sex. Why? Because that means I did it out of marriage. Why does that matter? Because the church told me, or the Bible says, or God says. Which, fun fact, God never actually says that, not even in the Bible. The Bible says that, but it's men who wrote it. And so even those little things were like, no, at no point was I thinking about God when I was having those thoughts. But in hindsight, that's just how deeply rooted those religious rules and thoughts and expectations were, that purity culture. And so even people who think, oh, I wasn't really impacted, I hated going to church, but I did it anyway. And I went on Wednesdays. They still have those little things that they think about or they worry about or they react to that they don't even realize come from their religious upbringing, as mild as it supposedly was.
That's right. That's exactly right. Everybody's got their own tolerances. Everybody's an individual on this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's how you have to suss it out, right? Because one man's torture is another person's CrossFit. Right. So there's, so people really can be quite, then they can approach this stuff in very, very different attitudes and ideas. I mean, there are very few, there would be very, it would be very difficult for a lot of people to understand why joining a Catholic monastery would not be entering a cult. It's not. I can tell you, right? Having gone down that rabbit hole and the number of hoops you have to jump through and all that in order to get there, they really, really give you informed consent. There's no question about what you're going to be doing, how often you're going to be doing it, and then you're going to be doing it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you go in there fully voluntarily, and you get what you were promised.
That's phenomenal.
That's the thing, right? When that's the case, it's not a cult. Cults are all about uninformed consent and about deceiving you. And so it's this whole switch and bait that happens. And sometimes you got to be in for a year or two before the switch and bait even happens. But it eventually will. And that's one of the hallmarks of these groups. And so you're always deceived, in other words, lied to, and you're always abused as a result. That's the nature of the group itself. And that's how you can tell whether you're dealing with a cultic activity. But everybody being their own person, some people will be more sensitive to this than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up that aspect of consent, because there's a lot of weird groups out there that aren't cults. All the people that are weirding out and whatever it is they like doing, they're doing it fully consensually, right? And then you have these normal mainstream groups that can be, in my opinion, categorized as a cult because nobody in that group is having a great time doing it or really necessarily knew exactly what it was that they were signing up for. And in Christianity, at least, and I know this to be true in a lot of Abrahamic religions, it's not supposed to be fun, because if it's easy and it's fun, something's not going, you're not sacrificing enough. Now, it's not, that scene from what's that movie, Da Vinci Code, where the guy's like whipping his back and like bleeding all over the place. That, obviously that's not it, because nobody would come back. How gross is that? Like, ew. Instead, it's, oh, you don't want to come on Wednesdays because that's hard. Well, you know what else is hard? Dying on the cross. Like that was hard too, but Jesus showed up for you. And then you're like, God damn it. Like, okay, fine. And like you just find yourself mildly uncomfortable 24/7, because that's how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be sacrificing, even though you're not being tortured or hurt. You're just mildly uncomfortable all the time, having to keep up with all the rules. You can't listen to the music everybody else is listening to. You can't watch all the shows everybody else wants to watch. You can't go to the parties. And they convince you, if you start to have a good time, that's what the devil wants. It does seem like fun, right? It probably is a lot of fun because it's the devil. Will it be fun in hell? I don't think so. And so when you do start to have a bad time, you're not necessarily alarmed or surprised, because that's kind of the whole thing. That's kind of the deal.
Absolutely. And that's very traditional with all Protestant religions. I mean, it goes all the way back, and it is hard work. It's supposed to earn you your place, or it's all predetermined, but you still have to work hard anyway, because if you don't, then, somehow you might not end up there anyway. It's a very, very convoluted set of rules when you get into all of it, but it's very, and all the denominations and everything, but they all spring from this place of, you are not worthy. You were born in sin. You are evil at your core. And it is only through the grace of the supernatural being that you are even more than a rock on a shore in some, place. And so suffering is your lot. Embrace it, love it, live it. And that so opens the door to so many levels of abuse justified by this belief set. And that's why we have to be critical and skeptical about beliefs, even though beliefs in and of themselves aren't the thing that's actually making the group a cult. It's what they do with the beliefs. And I have to stress this over and over again. I don't care if you believe in Xenu, or if you believe in hell, or if you believe in, some asteroid. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with that information. And if you use it to deceive and abuse people, now you're crossing lines.
Yeah. And I say something similar all the time. I tell people I have no problem with God, right? If you want to believe in God, I don't have any problem with that. I don't believe in God. But if you want to, that's not the issue. The issue is when religion comes in and says, in order to believe in God, you must be these things. You must do these things. Earthly human beings write books in the Bible that say, you're not allowed to masturbate or you're going to hell. God never says any of that stuff. Most of the messed up shit we deconstruct from was invented by other human beings. And so that's the tough part, is like, I don't hate God. If you want to love God, you do you. If you find peace in loving Jesus, you do your thing. But I do have a problem with the organized religion and the rules and the way that they harm people mentally, emotionally, physically, in any of those ways. And that's where the harm comes from.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I literally believe I've delivered that monologue on a podcast. And so, because I agree with you so much on this, I think we see very much eye to eye. I refer to myself as an atheist for convenience. Agnostic is probably more accurate. And really, I don't care. I mean, it's kind of in that realm for me. I'm not looking for spiritual salvation or some other supernatural creature or being to bless me or give me acceptance to be alive or anything like that. Or nor am I looking for infinite reward in the afterlife. So when you're not looking for those things and recognize you don't really need those things, religion really does become optional, and you can kind of look at it a little bit more critically. And I agree that the one of the problems in talking about religion is, and this has been my problem for years, is the word religion embraces three separate, very different concepts that are all related. And when you use the word, people don't always know which one you're using. I wish this was, I wish English was a little more diverse this way, because there's religious belief as in what's going on in your head. I don't care. You have at it. You can think whatever you want. You're going to, regardless of what I have to say or think about it. So go for it. That's religious belief, and that's religion. And if you got that kind of religion and your religion is bringing you happiness or fulfilling your needs, I've got literally 0.0 anything to say about it. Religious practice is the next thing that's defined by the word religion. So you say religion, and some people think you're talking about what they do on Sunday or Wednesday nights around the pagan fire or whatever, right? That's their religious practice. And it doesn't really matter to me as long as you're not breaking any laws or hurting anybody. But the third part of religion, the big picture religion, the wide sphere, is organized religion. And that's religion is where I go, okay, no, I'm stepping out of this whole thing.
Right.
That's where it goes from, we're going to practice the way we want to practice, to, oh, no. You're going to do this and this and this and this and this. And I'm going to tell you, because I'm God's conduit, what is what. And you're going to believe me because I'm God's conduit. And therefore, you're going to give me money and you're going to give me praise and approval. And you're going to think I'm the shit. And that's where we get the is it okay to swear?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
Okay, good. Fuck yeah. So that's where you get the culty stuff. That's when people in those positions of organized religion, power, that's the ministers, the bishops, the priests, the popes, the deacons, the reverends, whatever the term you want to use, that's where they get all their power. And that's where that organized thing comes in of
Yes.
hierarchical structures and all of that. I don't like any of that. I don't
Right.
be part of any of it. I don't like it. And I think it is so easily flipped by bad actors, by nefarious characters into cult stuff that I wish there was more regulation. I wish we had more inspection and regulation of religious entities in the United States. That's
I will have you know that I almost made a joke about how all the bad actors are in Scientology, but I'm a grown woman, so I won't make that joke. And I think another thing that gets people is when so many religions also want you to have faith. So when somebody says, "I'm God's conduit," and you say, "How do we know?" Everybody knows you doubt. You don't actually have faith, you doubt. You
That's
know,
right.
if you're Googling it, if you have questions, that's doubt. So looks like your walk with the Lord is quite weak and you need to work on that. That's on you now.
Oh,
That's your job.
critical thinking is a tool of Satan, don't you know?
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure that's like
Oh
the
yeah,
11th commandment or something like that.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
thou
yeah.
shalt not
That's
Google if you have questions.
right. Thou shalt not be skeptical. In other words, don't think too much, right? This is all about feelings and belief and euphoric experiences and feeling the faith, right? It's about emotional needs. I think there's a conversation to be had in terms of the utility of that. In other words, I don't think we're actually ever going to fully get rid of this concept or
Right.
wipe it out somehow through education or we're just going to teach everybody and they're going to stop thinking this way because I don't think it works that way at all. I
No.
think we invent this because we need it, because our
Yes.
emotional needs drive us. And again, we could have a long discussion about that. So I'm not one of these people who is like, get rid of religion, we shouldn't have religion, destroy it all, burn the churches, salt the ground. I'm not that guy at all. I know the necessity of it, and I know that some people especially very, very much feel they need it in their life, and I'm the
Yes.
last person who's going to take away from them.
Right.
It's the culty behavior that I rail against,
Right.
understanding the necessity of belief. People need
Right.
it.
Right. I don't know
Right.
if you've ever read Why We Believe in Gods by Dr.
Mm.
Anderson Thompson. So I've actually had him on as a guest before. Fantastic
Ooh,
book.
I gotta check this out.
Fantastic book. Highly recommend it. Very small, short read, but very impactful. One of those where like every sentence has a very particular job. But he talks about how believing in gods is actually what has kept human beings alive for a very long time. And it's helped us through time and evolution because, if we're just out here existing, we can basically burn ourselves to the ground as a species. But if we say, hey, guys, these are the things we need to do in order to survive, and as human beings do, some of them are like, well, why? You're like, why should I do this? And that's going to kill off the population if they're not all willing to help. But when you say, God wants us, or the sky god or the sun god or the cloud god or the spiritual nature god wants us to all work together to save our crops, to save our people, then it's like, oh, okay. This idea that we have someone to please usually finds a lot more success than the idea that our village just needs us to do this. And as
That's
we've
right.
seen with the COVID, we've seen how quickly people can say, well, fuck all y'all. I'm not going to help you guys survive. But when you add this whole, hey, the sun wants us to keep doing this thing and it will keep rising and it will keep bringing us grain if we follow the rules and we help each other survive. So it's almost inherent in human beings to start off by believing in a god and have to be convinced otherwise. It's more in our human nature to wonder why we wouldn't believe in a god or something than why we would. But it's a fantastic read. And I learned so much about myself as a creature, as a mammal through that book, and why our brains operate certain ways and why we might be driven to certain beliefs. And it also helped me be a lot more compassionate to people who are still very religious, especially the people who are quite violently religious, you know, the people who are putting it in your face and marching down your street and have the picket signs talking about how you're going to hell and stuff like that. It's a lot easier to understand why those people exist when you understand why it was necessary for human beings to develop these beliefs in the first place. But it does make you wonder, is it still true belief or is it something else? You know, is it considered true belief if you really didn't have a choice in thinking that there's a God or obeying God? Is that true belief? I don't think so. I think it's something else. But it's definitely a great read. I think you would enjoy it a lot.
No, I'm gonna check it out. What was that author's name again?
Dr. Anderson Thompson. Thompson with
Anderson.
no P. It's just Thom.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
good. There it is. I will definitely look that up. I don't know what he says yet. My concept of explaining it or understanding it deals with a model that involves emotional needs.
Mm,
I think religion checks a lot of boxes there.
yes.
And these are not, and just because it's fulfilling emotional needs, I mean, understand that doesn't mean it's illegitimate.
Mm,
Eating a Twinkie fulfills emotional needs. I mean, there's a lot of things that are
it sure
really, really
does.
good for us.
Yeah,
Reproduction fulfills emotional needs.
that's true.
Just because it does that doesn't mean it's, you know, somehow bad or wrong.
Right.
You know, I mean, we don't have to become hedonists, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
These emotional needs include community,
Yeah. Yep.
purpose, meaning,
Yes.
sense of self. I mean, so many, and there's different models of it, but it all breaks down to it brings us comfort, brings us
Yes.
security, brings us a
Yep.
community, gives us so many things. And if atheists as a body want to say or assert or push against this and say, well, this is all bad and wrong because it's false, it's based on false information, and it's all just nonsense that people should not be falling for because it's right out of the Stone Age. And I totally get that logic, been down that road. You got to realize that if you're going to take it away, you're going to have to put something else in its place because people are not going to just let you take away their
Yes.
emotional security, their community, their sense of self, purpose and meaning, etc. They're not going to let you do that.
Right.
That's the simplicity of it.
Yes. And I've had a guest on before who survived 3 cults, 3 different cults.
Wow.
And
Wow.
one of the points that he makes is he says, you know, you always think when you leave an abusive relationship or a cult or an abusive scenario of some sort with coercion, he said, you always think, oh, now that I know the signs, I'm never ever going to get involved in this ever again. And he goes, what you don't understand is you are now a walking target because you have no community, you have nothing to fall back on, you have no leadership because everything you've ever known was in that cult. And so you stick out like a red flag to anybody looking to kind of reabsorb you, you know, into their little clique, into their little nefarious group. Um and I feel like we see that even on things like college campuses, you know, some kid, he's walking alone by himself, looking around, he's got the campus map, he doesn't know what's going on. Greek life is like, hey, come over here, be a brother, be a sister. And I'm not saying anybody listening to this, I'm not saying Greek life is cold, but I'm also saying that I'm saying Greek is so cold. I'm saying that 100%. Like I'm just saying that. I'm saying that. I'm saying that. Because it is, they do such a good job of saying, oh, you're away from your family for the first time. You're far, far away. You're living on your own for the first time. Come join a group that's going to love you no matter what, that's going to let you be your best self. And also, can you pay our dues also? If you can't, like, that would be great. We all do it. We love you for it, you know? So you pay your dues and they're like, yay, welcome to the club. And then the next thing you know, you're attending events you otherwise wouldn't have attended. You're being introduced to people that have nothing in common with you that you never would have talked to before. And while part of that, it's always, well, part of me wants to say it's always good to expose yourself to types of people you've never been around and ideas you've never been around. It's a very fine line between being interested in learning about things and people that are different from you versus being absorbed into a group that you normally never would have been a part of, but because you don't have anyone else, like, okay, they seem cool, I'll just do whatever they're doing. And one road can take you down just learning about a bunch of people, and the other road can take you down, you're now a member of a group and you don't really have any individual identity, and now you don't know what you're going to do when you're out of this group either. And so you just don't get out of it. You just stay in it.
That's right. Yeah, it's security, support, community, etc. That's right. It's all about fulfilling those needs. And once those needs are filled, people aren't really asking too many more questions.
Right.
Because it feels complete.
Yeah.
And if things are fine, why would you rock the boat? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Right? Of course
Absolutely.
you would. Nobody would do that.
Dr. James Wathy, or Jack Wathy, who I've had on before as well, he talks about cults, and he says that some people, are built to be leaders, some people are built to be followers, and a lot of times people find immense comfort in being able to say, I don't have to lead this, you're going to lead this. Oh, like, thank God. Okay, yeah, I'll do whatever you say because I'm the kind of person who just needs a direction to follow. And I feel like that's where a lot of these people get caught up, is they need somebody to follow. And if you're charismatic, and if you seem like you make good decisions, and if you, for whatever reason, whether it's socially, financially, physically, emotionally, you embody what that person wishes they could be, boom, like, you're good, you're set. You don't even really have to do anything cool. You don't even have to show any cool skateboard tricks. Like, they're just going to follow you, and then you got them.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a theory I've read, dark triad, I think, apath, empath, sociopath, concept of dividing up the population, right? And there's
Yeah.
X amount who are sociopaths, right? Or people who aren't going to play well with others no matter what. But somehow, some way, many of them, either through charisma or power or influence, get in a position of influence over the largest category of these people, which apparently is apaths, people who are willing to go one way or the other. They just want strong leadership. They don't really care where it comes from. And then you have empaths, and we don't know percentage-wise. I don't think it's as small a number as there are sociopaths. I don't think it's that kind of balancing act. But there's but a lot of the followers of cults are actually drawn from the empath pool. A lot of the either enablers, this is just my thinking, there's no like research I can point to on this, but I believe that it is empaths who become the number one target for these groups in the main, because of the concepts of love, affinity, euphoria, making the world a better place, changing everything, making yourself better. Again, if there's a certain class of people who believe this is possible, most of them are pretty empathic. They want to improve things with other people. I think that's been my thinking. It's just a sort of fuzzy idea, but it seems to make sense to me, because empaths become weaponized in cults.
I was just about to say that same thing. Yep.
Yeah, and that becomes your most powerful cult followers, your lieutenants, your inner circle, your people who are in charge tend to be these weaponized empaths who so fall for the messaging that they will kill somebody to save the world. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Lifton wrote a book about that, Destroying the World to Save It, about Shinrikyo. And that's literally what they thought they were doing. It's so backwards, you can't even get your head straight on it. But that's what people do.
And I feel like empaths are also usually drawn to being problem solvers. Like, empaths are usually like, I feel how upset everyone is, or I feel how lost they are. How can I fix this? What can I do? And then, like you said, they end up in positions of leadership of some sort, or their drive to want to fix whatever it is that needs to be fixed makes them weaponized. I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. I having lived it, I think this is the case. I knew, because you realize that coming out of these groups, whether you're looking at the JWs, Mormons, Moonies, Gothard, IBLP, whether you're looking at Scientology, beyond the second gen versus first gen issue, which is kind of a different level of complication. The people who go all in on this, who are the most effective cult members, are the people who really care about other people.
Yeah.
And that's
Yep.
just and somehow the cult leader's genius is being able to take that, sell this person on on a set of ideals, goals, purposes, meaning, put them on this path that they imagine is true, even though the thing is a complete narrative story. It's just in fantasy that
Yeah.
the cult leader makes up, and says, this is where we're going. Don't you want to go there? And they're like, hell yes, I want to go there. Because at the other end of this line is the Star Trek world. Everybody gets along. There's no money. There's no corruption. There's no this. There's no that. Everybody's wonderful to each other. And we can all work together in this common thing, which is what empaths kind of tend to want to do. And that's what motivates them to solve problems. Whereas apaths, they're just kind of going with the flow, because they
Yes.
don't really invest themselves too much one way or the other. It's not a perfect way of modeling behavior, because everybody cares about something, but it's a way of sort of getting a distant look at the
Yeah.
situation. And for me, it really helped a lot to sort of think about the cult problem that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way to look at it, especially that kind of fluid middle person, they think that they're not susceptible to either one of these types of people, when in reality, just because you don't necessarily subscribe to anything doesn't mean you can't eventually get roped into something somehow. You may not be the leader of the group, and you may not be the worst one that they pick on, that they ostracize from everybody, but you're still in that just kind of meh, like, if you don't care to either direction, you won't necessarily notice when you're being sent a certain way. You won't necessarily notice when you're being corralled a certain way if neither way is unattractive to you, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, it does, totally. And it's
Yeah.
interesting how also it seems to be a kind of human thing, I think. Yeah, I think it falls down to the level of, I think we're talking about everybody when we say things, when I say things like, everybody's got this thing about being right, about
Yes.
being on the right path, on being on the on, that when you commit, you've done the hard work, you've done the research, you've decided this is a good thing, and I'm going to go all in on it. And I think that's one of those basic traits that cult leaders really take advantage of. They know
Yes.
that that's the case. There's a kind of inertia to our behavior. We commit or we get involved in something, and it's easier to just keep going than it is to break away. And so, they know that, people will stick, a lot of people will stick fairly easily. They don't have to do a whole lot of, mumbo jumbo
Yes.
to get them. But it seems but the more, I don't know how to describe this in ways that don't sound like, kind of bad. I'm not trying to say that people's value is any less because they don't bring a dynamic energy. But it seems that the empaths are the ones who do that. They are so gung ho. Their mission is so
Yes.
aligned with what the cult leader is selling as a message or purpose,
Yes.
that they're just going to go all in. And I just don't, you just don't see that kind of thing out of the apaths in the same way, as same level of commitment, So I don't know. I just think that's kind of how it breaks down.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happens when you look at it like a sunk cost fallacy for a lot of
Uh-huh.
people.
Yeah.
They're like, "Well, I've already." A lot of the people that reach out to me from listening to episodes, they say, "I spent 40 years doing it. I spent 40 years. If I leave now, that's 40 years of my life down the drain." And you're like, "So you'd rather waste 45? 49? 55?" Like, you know
Exactly.
that life doesn't end after 40, right? Like, there's a lot more after that. There's a whole lot. And so if they're not the kind of person you described, then maybe they're that kind of person where
Oh, totally.
they see the issues. They don't necessarily agree with everything, but it's easier, the fear of being wrong, the fear of having to say, "I know that this is what I said for 25, 35, 45 years, but I have changed, and I'm sorry, and I've done research, and I'm not the same person." They're so much more afraid of that than spending another 20 years in something that they don't agree with, or they feel is a little hostile or kind of freaks them out a little bit, or they would rather be doing something else. They would so much rather spend time doing that than facing potential outside world. Like, what does the world look like without that group, right? Um, which brings up a question I've been meaning to ask you.
Hmm.
What did your parents ever tell you what it was about Scientology that was attractive to them? Like, why Scientology as opposed to Presbyterianism, Catholicism, evangelicalism?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I'll tell you all about it. Um, the let me say this real fast because I wanted to respond to something you just said, and then
Yeah.
I'll answer your
Yeah.
then let me answer your question. I only wanted to add to it in that the sunk cost fallacy is absolutely a thing, but the really scary part about people in cults, I think, thinking back to my own time and of course, all the interviews and stuff done with other people, because you've lost so many of your critical thinking skills being involved in this group for so long and going with the flow and the inertia and the acceptance of it, and these become fundamental truths to a cult member, the teachings. And there's this sad fact that by the time you're actually reasoning through sunk cost fallacy in your mind as a cult member, you're pretty much on your way out already.
Yep. Yep.
Because you've
Yep.
let yourself start thinking skeptically and critically about the group. And once that begins, it can take years. Took me 10
Yes.
from my first point of departure from the belief set, from the first point of recognizing the group that I was all in on, might not necessarily be as honest and truthful and forthcoming and and forthright as I thought they were. From the
Yes.
first moment of that to me leaving was 10 years and a lot of moments of doubt and frustration. And so that need to not think about it, even to that's kind of how they really get you, is they give
Yes.
you these cliches that we call thought stopping or thought terminating cliches, and these things become mantras you feed yourself, and you get to become like quite good at filling yourself up with them, that it's going to be whatever. I mean, it's going to be okay is itself a thought stopping cliche, right? But those kinds of things where you just shut down the thinking entirely and dedicate yourself back to the purpose and
Yeah,
get back to work.
definitely. In Scientology, I'm curious,
Yeah.
maybe you had this experience, maybe it was different. In Christianity, I've noticed that a lot of us, especially the people I've talked to through episodes, when we first start asking those questions, when we first start considering, the sunk cost fallacy, do we believe this? Do we like this? Is this what we want? There's a period of hanging on to your religious beliefs for dear life, because
Yep.
in Christianity, they warn you the whole time. They're like, once you're out in the real world, the devil's going to be everywhere. You're going to meet people, and it is going to look fun to not go to church, and it is going to look fun to be an atheist, and it is going to look fun to also like do drugs, because I guess that's all atheists do is just sit around like smoke and crack all the time. Um
Oh yeah.
and
Didn't you, between eating the babies?
Right, and that's liberalism. That's liberalism. That's not an
Oh, so,
atheist.
yeah,
That's just being
yeah, yeah.
liberal. Yeah,
Liberal. Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
Totally different side of my life. um, but they warn you like, yeah, the music will sound good, but it's like demonic and like like it's wrong to listen to that stuff. Did they do that in Scientology? Was there any here's what happens if you leave? That's doubt.
Oh, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't tell you how many times. I can't count on two hands how many times I was told I was going to end up flipping burgers at McDonald's. Right, like that's the line you get, and it comes straight from the top and just filters down over all the years. But it's the same bullshit. It's absolutely you're going to fail. They have terminology. In fact, they have two dictionaries worth of terminology in Scientology. Actual real dictionaries they've
Wow.
written based on L. Ron Hubbard's definitions of all these Scientology terms.
Wow.
And yeah, when we talk about loaded language, we're talking about very, very loaded language in Scientology. And they either redefine English words or they've come up with new words entirely for what they're talking about, like Thetan, for a spirit. They don't call them spirits or souls or ghosts, or they call them Thetans, stuff like that. I got a little Oh, yes, the fear mongering, the fear installing. So there are so many thought stopping cliches in Scientology
I bet.
that shut down the thinking and and you just don't get any farther. Um, and when it comes to self-policing, it's not a matter necessarily of self-censure all the time, or you cannot do this because of some rule. But they have the terminology they use in Scientology is whether you are ethical or not.
Hmm.
Or this is
That's
the
harsh.
Yeah, it's ethics. That's the term that's used, right? Is ethics and justice. If your ethics, the way they redefine, and again, Hubbard offers definitions for these terms that are exclusively for Scientology. So, in the Scientology context, if you are ethical, that means you are following the guidelines of the church. You are in good standing. You're being a good example of a Scientologist, which means you're successful. You're applying the Scientology knowledge in your life. You are disseminating or promoting Scientology to other people around you. You are living the good life of the good Scientologist. If that includes, of course, not stealing from people, not killing people, all the usual stuff. If you do not follow ethically the codes and principles of the church, you are out ethics. You're unethical.
Whoa.
Your ethics are either in or they are out. It's binary. They're not
Wow.
a little bit in or a little bit out. You are either in or you are out. And if you are out ethics, that means you are saying or doing things that are contrary to your own personal survival and the survival of the church. And the church's survival is always graded first. If it's a matter of your freedom of speech versus the church's freedom of speech or survival or creating a problem for the church, then clearly you need to shut the fuck up
Yeah.
because that's out ethics to attack the
Wow.
church, to go after the church, to do anything with the church. And ethics is all defined in Scientology, pretty blatantly even,
I bet.
as being in alignment with what L. Ron Hubbard wants. And if he
And
wanted it,
what
it's
does
good.
he want? What is it that L. Ron Hubbard wants? J
Money,
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, yeah. Well,
money, money, money. And he
and
said
that's
it
like
in his policies.
and
He
that's
wrote it.
deep too, because like, if someone looked at me and they were like, "You're a sinner," it's like, "Okay." But if someone looked at me and they were like, "You're unethical," I'd be like, "Whoa, whoa, hold on
Yeah.
a second, what the heck?"
Mm.
And I can definitely see how you would want to, like, be found ethical as fast as possible, because like, to accuse somebody of being, like, an unethical human being, like, whoa, that goes so much
Oh, yeah.
deeper.
Oh no,
Yeah,
and this is rife throughout Scientology. This is common. I mean, ethics and justice, and the idea is that if you're ethical, you are following the path on your own determinism. Nobody has to be telling you what to do. You're just doing it. You're out ethics, and justice is required to get you back on the rails if you go out ethics. And so, justice are defined by Hubbard not as the right or moral or true or correct thing to do. No, justice in Scientology is the church is going to be empowered to take action against you to get you in conformity with the church and its rules. And that's justice because you've
interesting.
demonstrated you're not capable of self discipline to the degree necessary to follow the guidelines of the church. And that's because of certain trauma. It's a long explanation, but it's because of all this accumulated trauma you're carrying around with you from all your past lives and this dirty little demon that lives in your mind called the reactive mind. And you are giving over to that. There's no Satan in Scientology, there's Thetans, and there is the reactive
Interesting.
mind. And every Thetan, every spiritual entity is carrying this mass of trauma around with them, accumulated over all their lives, and it's what causes them to act and go off the rails. And so rather than the Satan tempting you, the idea is you are allowing the reactive mind to control you subconsciously and dictate your actions rather than you rising, picking yourself up by your bootstraps and rising above that. And that's
Interesting.
it's exact same kind of it's different concepts, different ideas, same result. You police your behavior based on what the church wants, not what you necessarily believe or think is right or true.
And what does Scientology offer as, like, why would somebody want to dedicate that much of their life to Scientology if it's not God the same way that Christians view them? What's the promise there at the end?
Right. The promise is the big carrot that's on the stick that you're chasing the entire time and paying a lot of money, by the way. It's Scientology ain't no charity and it ain't free. Right? You are
It
paying,
looks expensive as
paying.
fuck.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing I will say about many Christian churches, or many churches out there, period, is they'll give you a Bible. They don't care if you don't come back next week. They don't hunt you down and chase you. They're not constantly putting you through loyalty tests. It's an open door policy. Come in and worship, leave when you want, no biggie, no big deal. With cults, it's never that way.
Right.
Your attendance is mandatory. Your participation is never enough. You are never giving enough. You're never over there enough until you even work there, and then you wish you could give more.
Yeah.
And all of this kind of commitment,
Yeah.
right? And if you
And
leave,
people are stationed to watch and report
yeah,
back.
exactly. So all of that is that environment. And now that I've gone on that whole tear, I forgot the question you asked me.
I was just saying, like, what is it about Scientology that makes it attractive or that makes people
yeah.
want to do what they say when it sounds like all the money is being funneled to the top?
It is. And the
Yeah.
carrot the carrot that you're chasing, spending all that money, is personal spiritual freedom and immortality.
But it sounds like the
And
opposite of freedom, to be honest with you.
well, that might, but those are just conditions you have to comply with to get there. See, it's all about you're the most powerful causative in the driver's seat being in the universe, as long as you submit to L. Ron Hubbard, right? So
That's
so
wild.
that's the concept, is you are actually going to follow in L. Ron Hubbard's footsteps. You're going to do the same series of processes and actions, because we haven't even touched on that, but there's rituals and practices you do in Scientology under the guise of what's called auditing, which is their version of counseling. And through this continuing ongoing process of counseling, you will follow the same path Hubbard did and achieve the same state of immortality and godhood that he did, which means quite literally that you will be able to end your life this lifetime. Your body will grow and die, and you won't have to be, or compelled to be, in another body and live another life and be on this endless wheel of eternity, life after life after life. You'll be able to step out of that and go create your own universe if you want.
Interesting. So
Really heavy
reincarnation
stuff.
is a punishment in Scientology, as opposed to in some others where there's different types, like pleasant reincarnation and unpleasant. Like, I think there's some religions where if you're a good person, you come back as like a fun thing, but if you're a bad person, you come back as, a worm or something like that. But it sounds like
Yeah,
there you
that's
don't want to come back to a body. You want to make the astral plane.
right. Well, that's more of a Buddhist or Hindu concept. In Scientology, karma is not a thing.
Right.
You'll do yourself in if you know you're a bad person. The concept in Scientology is that you're in the driver's seat. There's no supernatural force or pressure or cosmic wind or karmic justice deciding things for you. You're the one who's in charge, and you've been in charge the entire time. You've just experienced the playground of the physical universe. This is how Hubbard talks about it. This is Scientology, right? Is this universe of space-time that we all live in, that we talk about with the Big Bang all the way to now, and here we are, the entire cosmos, all of it, is a playground that you and I and everybody else who's living, every other Thetan, in other words, we are mutually creating this illusion.
Interesting.
It's like the Matrix, except it's not a computer simulation. It's one we as entities are all agreeing to be part of. And we all agree to the laws of this universe, and therefore we live. It's a sort of play acting situation. This is how Hubbard describes it, is that we have all been trapped here. It was a playground. It was a place to go have fun. And 4 quadrillion years ago, he says, is when we came here. And we arrived into this blank slate, this empty universe. Do whatever you want. It's got, matter and energy and space and time. And spiritual thetans aren't created out of matter, energy, space, and time. They are independent of a physical experience. The only other place I've ever seen anybody describe anything like that is that's how you talk about God.
Yeah.
God is outside of space-time. God created space-time. His existence transcends and has nothing to do with this existence. Scientology believes ye and me and thee are all in that position. And over the millennia that we have been trapped here in this universe, at some point we got stuck here. And this universe became a place we couldn't get out of. And so where you at first were going from planet to planet or civilization to civilization or developing this universe and all that, over all these trillinia, eventually you got sucked into this game. It was a game. It was make-believe. It was let's go to the playground and have fun. It was playing with dolls, except the dolls are bodies. And this all precedes Earth. This is millions and millions and millions and trillions of years ago that this all started up. And through this cycle of slowly sort of being traumatized in these bodies and being controlled in these bodies and being killed, having your bodies killed and associating with it and identifying with the bodies. So you felt as a thetan, you died. And then, you're off for a million years being a rock for some time because you don't know what else to do with yourself. And then you go get into the cycle again and you get another body somewhere in some planet, in some civilization somewhere that's developed. And it starts all over again. And there's a lot more to the cosmology, a lot more. But, this is the cycle of it. And we're trapped here. And we're so trapped. We've been playing with dolls for so long that we think we are the doll. And that's where L. Ron Hubbard says we are circa 1955 when he's lecturing about this stuff. He's like, we're all trapped here. This is a prison planet. And we got to get the hell out. And the only way to do that is follow this closely taped path that L. Ron Hubbard took. And if you do that, and you got to pay a lot of money to do it, but if you do it, you're guaranteed at the end of this thing, at the highest levels of operating thetan, you will achieve a breakaway freedom from this entire mess and get back to how you were 4 quadrillion years ago.
Wow. And how is it supposed that L. Ron Hubbard knows these things if he too is a human in a body like with us while he's saying this?
We didn't ask.
Hey, you know what though? Been there.
He says specifically, we will not ask how it was I came to rise above the bank. This is what they call the react mind, the bank. And we won't go into any of that. He alludes to in a couple lectures, he gave thousands of lectures.
Yeah, I imagine.
Thousands. But he says in very, very generalized ways that he's been bopping around in the universe for a very, very, very long time, trying to salvage it and get a crew of people together who he can work with, who can pull it off. And that's how we saw ourselves, was his group of people who were pulling it off to make the world free for everybody and free them from war, insanity, and criminality. We were all in on this. And this is why I talk about empaths, because these are very empathic goals. And it sucked a lot of people into Scientology. My parents, other people I knew and met over the years, very, very much believed in this idea. If you thought, everything makes sense if you look at it through this lens. If you thought for real that this deck of cards had written on every card a magical ritual that you could engage in that would free you spiritually and allow you godhood. Whatever your concept of God is now, that's where you're going. All you got to do is do it exactly as it says, and you're free. You'd pay anything for this deck of cards.
Yeah. No, really though. Yeah.
And you would follow each one to the comma, and you'd want to make sure you understood it, and you'd want to do it, and you'd be committed to it. And if somebody else came along and said, that's a bunch of crap, you'd punch them in the face.
Yeah.
Be like, no, man, this is the real deal. This is how I'm going to achieve godhood. And then if somebody started telling you, oh, no, that's all just hokum and bullshit, you need to stop that, that's crazy talk, you'd start thinking about that person as somebody who's trying to do everybody else in.
Yeah. Especially if the church is telling you that. If the church is like, yeah, see, that's an example of a denier who's going to hell, so leave him in your dust.
But it's actually so much worse, because it's not just that they're going to go to hell, ha ha ha. It's they're trying to take as many people with them as they can, including you. So you better disconnect from that guy. You better not have anything to do with him, because he's trying to take away your cards. Right. And this is the only thing that's going to save the world. We're going to save the world with this. And, everybody should have a deck of cards. Right. But they're not wise enough or smart enough or aware enough, or they haven't been, given the opportunity yet. And we just have to get to them. And that's the mission. And if you could buy into that concept, then anybody who would decry or criticize or be skeptical about it would be labeled immediately, not just a different thinker. They're an enemy of mankind.
Yeah. Yep.
That's how it doesn't take anything to dial that up to 11.
Yeah. And then the next thing you know, you're flying a plane into the World Trade Center because somebody told you something and it was sold to you so hard, and you think that they are literally trying to destroy what you know to be the world,
Right. That's
just,
right. And that's how, the fair game you hear about it is Scientology, where they stalk and harass their ex-members and their critics. It's all true.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that they just harass you.
Oh, endlessly. And why would you do that? Like what group does that? Even Catholics don't do that. As bad as they are, they don't even do that. What it's organized. They pay good money, tens of thousands of dollars to PIs and lawyers. And I mean, it's like, what are we looking at here? Well, you're looking at a cult. That's what makes it a cult.
Yeah.
Culty groups don't do that. And there's lots of religions, lots of groups that are not in any way like that.
Right.
So it's a pretty easy comparison when you ask the right questions as to whether you're looking at the right group or not. But something you said earlier, I wanted to comment on it. This might be a good place for it. We try so hard to educate people about the red flags of these groups.
Mm.
But you know what I think? It's harder to do this, but I think the more effective way of proofing somebody up against a cult, teach them how to spot the red flags within themselves.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
What are some examples for people who might be curious? Like, what are some red flags within them that makes them either susceptible or already a member, or what would that look like?
Well, it would look like euphoria. What you want to be, see, it's when you're feeling your best. And this is in context, okay? This isn't like you go to a concert and you feel wonderful. I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is, if you go to a group of people you're just meeting, or you're just getting involved with, or you've been involved with for a short time, or there's an individual who comes into your life who is absolutely amazing, who you can't stop thinking about, who you believe is special in some way, who you think you feel better when you're around that person, or you feel more your true self when you're with that group. And this happens fast.
Yes.
This is an immediate kind of thing. This is
Love
not
bombing.
A long, protracted thing. Yeah, see, that's what they're doing to you. But what you can pay attention to is what's going on in your head. Because love bombing sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But if it's working, you're feeling awesome. And you're feeling like this group is a group of people who finally understand you and accept you for who you are. And quite honestly, everything I'm describing is the dream. It's what everybody wants. When you get it, is the time to start being hypercritical of what's going on around you, not to destroy it or diffuse it or ruin it for yourself, but so you don't, because that's when you're most vulnerable,
Yes.
is when you're in
Yes.
that awe experience. That's when falling in love is so heady and amazing. You're literally, it's heart racing. You can feel the chemicals in your body responding to this experience. That's not a bad thing by itself.
Right.
But what's going to happen is this is induced in a person through meditation, mantras, repetition, chanting, auditing, love bombing, these feelings of, amazing wonderfulness come up in you. That's when you have to go, okay, why am I feeling this way? Because what they're going to do is they're going to give you a reason why you're feeling this way. In Scientology, this reason would be you've come in, you've signed up for this communications course, you start doing the first exercises on it, and you're sitting there in a chair, not doing much of anything, and suddenly you feel great. And they come in and they say, you're now exterior. You're having an out of body experience. You're sitting there going, oh my God, I feel so weird and funny, and I'm not sure what to feel about this, because they've induced a disassociated state is what they've done. There's exercises they do to do this. You feel disassociated, feel weird, you feel a little funny. Maybe it has to do with some trauma in your past and you're kind of popping out of it a little bit, and you start feeling pretty good. And they come in and give you an interpretation. Here's why you feel that way. And that's the exact moment where you're going to get nailed, where they're going to catch you. They're going to hook you.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes. And I cannot agree with that more, because there is such a pattern of that happening. And I know I keep bringing up evangelicals or Christianity because that just happens to be my personal scope and like the people I talk to the most. But there is that whole, two different people can read the same verse or hear the same commandment. And if you go to two different churches, you're going to get two different answers as to what that is. And it's very interesting too, how a lot of these religions and these cults, they'll say something very blatant. Like the Bible will say, if your daughter's not a virgin on her wedding day, stone her in the street. And you're like, whoa, that seems kind of rough. And they're like, it's a metaphor. It was a different time. That's a metaphor for spiritually, if you've, whatever. And you're like, oh, okay. But if it says something ambiguous, very ambiguous, then they're like, no, that means gays are bad. That's what that means. It's like, but that's what that, are you sure that wasn't a metaphor too? No, that wasn't a metaphor. The rest is a metaphor, but that's not a metaphor. And that interpretation being left open-ended in any of these groups of any kind, even non-religious groups, that's very dangerous. That's where because part of me believes that some of these people actually believe these things. Like, do you think that L. Ron Hubbard actually believed what he was preaching to people? Because like, when it comes to mega church pastors, I don't think that Joel Osteen is a Christian. I think he's just a businessman. We saw, I don't know if you've ever heard of Benny Hinn, but he's a evangelical mega church pastor in prison now for a number of things. I don't think he was a Christian. I think he was a businessman. But some of these people, I do actually believe these things below a certain level. I do think that there are people out there that, even if the message is harmful, even if it's destructive, they truly read that verse and interpret it a certain way. Of course, they don't want to think that God would demand the murder of all the babies in Egypt. Of course, they don't want to think that he would demand that, women be stoned in the street, and men who marry previously married women also deserve to be stoned in the street, which is an interesting one. Seems to be forgotten by time. But like, some people I legitimately think believe they're doing the right thing by trying to indoctrinate you, trying to proselytize to you, trying to get you to come to church or temple or whatever it is. And then there's other people who they look around and they're like, these people will do just about anything if I tell them that God says to, or whoever, says to. So I'm just gonna see what happens, right? And that's when you get these megachurch pastors and these L. Ron Hubbards. But I do wonder if he truly believed that, or maybe he didn't in the beginning, but he convinced himself it was true, or maybe it was like a mental illness. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever think about?
Oh yeah. Oh no. This is a great topic to talk about, because there's a lot of places to go with it. First, I want to say that at the end of the day, whether in terms of determining the validity of the group or the destructiveness of the group, whether the leader or leadership believes in the dogma or not is really actually irrelevant to the question, and not an unimportant question. I'm just saying.
But you're right, though. Yeah.
But to what happens to the experience of the followers and the abuses that happen doesn't matter. Now, that being said, it's an interesting point, and one that I see as a sort of arc, I guess. I think a lot of these guys, and we talk about L. Ron Hubbard, we talk about Jim Jones, some of these people have histories as children that give you the impression that they were always very, very much into believing things, or believing in themselves, certainly. But usually, like Jim Jones had a whole, like, he would run from church to church to church in town, in the little town he grew up in, and he just loved playing preacher. That was his thing. He played, as a kid, he played faith healer. And I'm told he studied cult leaders and religious leaders, and he loved Hitler and stuff like that. So there's some people who I think are born or raised or at some point have these epiphanies. Moon apparently had one when he was, a young man. Jesus came to him, right? Similar to the Joseph Smith story.
Did he? It's interesting that Jesus came to him and Joseph Smith and told him two totally different things. You know what I mean?
I know, right?
Isn't that weird?
It's so weird. It's so weird. God works in mysterious ways. That's for sure.
It's certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, so some of them, I think, go into it believing something. And then I think others see it as, oh no, this is easy money, or this is, L. Ron Hubbard in his famous quotes, which were 3 different instances, witness testimony that he said the way to make money is to start a religion. I mean, he said it. And I think that's exactly what he started doing. I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he got into doing it. Yet we come to the end of the arc and we find L. Ron Hubbard a broken, insane, paranoid, delusional, malignant narcissist who has ruined every relationship he ever had. And he died alone, and, not in poverty, but alone, and, familyless, friendless. I mean, it was really quite bad. All these followers, but he couldn't be around them because he was running from the law. So he was in seclusion. He had like 3 people who took care of his needs. So I believe that he did believe it by the end. I think he went all in on it. And when we look at people like Osahara, the Shinrikyo guy, or we look at Jim Jones, or we certainly look at somebody like Marshall Applewhite from Heaven's Gate.
Yeah.
Now, this is a guy who believed what he was saying, because he walked the walk. He didn't just talk the talk. Applewhite specifically, like, mutilated his body and did various things in order to prepare for his, alien ascent. And when you see that, you realize you're dealing with somebody who's actually probably mentally ill, certainly in a, in a spectrum of some kind that normal average people are not in and on. And I think that informs their behavior, but I think it also it reflects on the passion with which their inner circle will believe. Some inner circles are fully in on all the crimes. They know exactly what's going on. They know that this is a thing. It's an operation. We're fooling people. But they're in the inner circle because they think there's still something going on here that's really legit or good or true, or they want to be part of. With Applewhite's group, everybody knew exactly where the end goal of this thing was, and they were all in on it. And that includes him. And so, and same with Shokahara, right? The Aum Shinrikyo guy, is he ended up, sarin gassing and wanting to destroy the world. He definitely went all in on, if they're not with me, they're against me.
Yeah.
And waged war against the world. And this kind of thing, I noticed, tends to follow public shame and ridicule that's irreparable or undeniable in the cult leader's eyes. Jim Jones's final days were, with that senator coming down, Leo Ryan came down, and the gig was up, right? But he had already been on drugs for years, going down the path of crazy. L. Ron Hubbard was on all kinds of drugs and other issues, and was, I believe, going senile. And I also think he suffered from something called temporal lobe epilepsy, which I think caused religious visions.
Interesting.
Megalomania. So, and I think some of these other guys do too. I think Applewhite might have suffered from that too. So motivation and intention of cult leaders is a fantastic and very, very interesting spectator sport for us in this area, right? We love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
Because clearly you're going to look at the leader through a different lens if you think they really believe and are sincere,
right,
versus if they're just running a con. Either way, though, the results are so bad that I have to say, well, it's an interesting intellectual exercise, but at the end of the day, doesn't matter.
Yeah, and so many people are angry whenever they first start to deconstruct, or whenever they first leave their religion. They're angry. They're like, I've been fooled, I've been duped, I've been lied to. Everyone lied to me, like the whole circle. They knew what was going on the whole time. And I don't know, like, I feel like those people are just as duped. Those people are just as confused and lied to. Like, it's easy to look back and be like, why were all the adults telling me that this was the way to live the whole time? Because all the adults think that this is the way to live, like,
right.
And I always say to a certain level, because I do think like the top 3 tiers of most major religious organizations are just a bunch of bullshitters who are trying to grift as much money as they can. And like just trying to take advantage of as many people as possible. But like, when people are like, oh, my pastor told me this, my pastor told me that, I sincerely believe your pastor thinks that he's ordained by God to tell you these things. Like, as much as we want to demonize those people, I do think that those people sincerely think they're doing the right thing. Now, this is not including, the what we know to be like child sex abuse and stuff like that. Like, everybody knows that's wrong. And like, I've read the Bible, it doesn't say to do that, but I sincerely believe that the people we are usually the first to be mad at when we're looking back on that stuff, being like, why did my parents let me do that? Why did my grandparents let me do that? Why did my whole church? Those are the people that are in it too. Like, those are the people that they just haven't reached whatever you reached in order to realize it wasn't something you wanted to be a part of. But I do, in thinking that, I do wonder, at what level are you allowed to be like, nah, this person's just a Disney villain. Like, this person's just an awful person. They knew the whole time that this was a con, etc. And so that's why I'm always curious what people who came out of organizations like that, what they think about the founders and the leaders, and whether or not they actually believed it.
It's absolutely fascinating. And it's also, what was I going to say? I had this thought, and it was right there when you were talking about
was
that.
it about the people that we're maddest at are the ones who are often still indoctrinated?
Recovery. That's right. Let's talk about this for a second, because I have a few things about recovery that are not obvious that I think could be said.
Yeah.
10 years out of a cult, that's my experience. And studying it, that's part of my experience. So that's what I'm bringing to saying these things. One, I think that it's very interesting to watch the arc or the stages of recovery. I don't think it's a formalized, okay, you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this. Everybody's their own person, and like stages of grief, we go through some of these stages, but that doesn't mean we are always going through them in order, But when you have to arrive at acceptance, or you want acceptance at the end, you realize these other stages of anger and bargaining and denial and these other things actually, that kind of fits with what I'm doing. It's a great model of behavior. And one of the things that happens when we come out is we're now thrown into a new stage of, oh, I accepted all of this. Here's, I accepted it. It was true. The pack of cards, it was all true. Now it's all false. Now it's all bullshit. Now you've unraveled, you've hit a moral dilemma. I think that's how I describe the process. I think it's a moral dilemma. I think you hit a point, a crossroads, where you are presented with information that you cannot deny, that you can't cognitive dissonance your way out of, and you have to deal with it. And when you have to deal with it, you suddenly realize there's a lie, there's deception, there's a problem here that I never, ever expected to have out of this group or leader. And it throws you. It really throws you. And suddenly that kicks in the frontal lobes, and suddenly you're thinking a little more critically about what's going on. And you get yourself out. But the mistake we make is, because it was such an emotional investment for us and we were so betrayed by the experience, and I think this is common for a lot of ex-cult members, is because their exit path involves learning of the betrayal and then having to process and deal with that we go binary. We go from it was all white to now it's all black. We're habituated as cult members, to a degree, to think binarily, to think in binaries. We're not taught. We're carefully indoctrinated not to think in spectrums. They're not shades of gray. It's all good or it's all bad. And you're still in that habit when you exit the cult. You've just been out for a few days, a month, 2, 3. How many years were you in? And you're you think you're gonna change your entire worldview in a couple of months? I mean, come on, this is a long process.
Yeah,
it took years to create the indoctrination and mindset. It's gonna take years to get out of it. It doesn't have to go at a snail's pace. You can educate yourself. You can work on it. You can be proactive. But the view at the beginning tends to be very black and white. And over time, if a person engages in some psychoeducation and some cult education and learns about themselves, learns about the groups, how they're put together, watches your podcast, watches mine, listens to the stories, they start putting together two things: the cult leader playbook and how they subscribe to that playbook and are undoing the processes. Right? These are the two things that if you're seeking, if you're looking, if you're a curious person post cult and you want to make sure you never have that happen to you again, knowledge is your weapon. And that knowledge will quickly teach you, and I mean quickly by a couple years, at least for me. I'm a slow learner though. But you learn again about shades of gray. You learn again the world is not binary, it is shades of gray. And that, in fact, the more you heal from the trauma, the more you review and look at your own intentions, and you get a little bit more distance from the whole thing. You're able to kind of look a little more objectively, slowly over time at the picture, and a couple things start dawning on you. At least, again, this is my experience. Number one, I was in a cult, so were all of they.
Yes.
And then the second thing that you realize, and this is the tough one, and it's not a day one thing to even talk about. You don't even go there with the person for a while. But the second thing is you contributed to it too.
Yes.
Right? And that's where you got to get to. And a lot of people, I won't say majority, I don't know. I actually don't know. But I know that there are too many people who are not curious enough, who do not walk that path, who do not go looking for the answers. They would rather get them from a guru, and they just cult hop from one to another. And we see that. We see that all the time. I'm told the majority of ex-cult members cult hop in one way or another, but I think the studies are still out on it.
Yeah.
But those things, those lessons that I learned along the way are very valuable. And I'm glad to have forums like this to talk about them, because people need to know that getting out is just the beginning.
Yes.
And And you got a long road ahead of you of reacclimation into the big wide world. You've been in a bubble world. And the moral values and the moral foundations that a person develops as a cult member are what justify and rationalize all the cult bullshit. It's in that world, right is wrong, good is bad, freedom is slavery. It's like that's where your brain is at when you're first stepping out of that. And it takes a while to rewire it, just physically. It just takes a while to rewire.
Yes.
And, we used to have advice like, don't continue using the language, for example. That's what keeps the patterns in place, is you keep talking the talk. Stop talking the talk. Figure out how to say these things without using cult terminology. That's a great way to force this recovery to move faster and move your brain, retraining your brain faster.
Yes.
And, that kind of thing, right? So, but don't avoid it. Don't deny it. Don't hide it in the closet. I don't mean don't talk about it. I mean, when you talk about it without using the cult language.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. And that is such a good point where you were talking about, the black and the white doesn't just go away. It sticks around, even if you don't think you're thinking about it from the perspective of your former faith. It's one of the most embarrassing parts of deconstruction, at least on my end, was having to look back on all the times that I was just, no, that's right or that's wrong. No, there's no, the death penalty is fine. There's no nuance there. Get rid of them all. Just kill everybody. Just kill all the murderers. It's but what about the two people that maybe didn't murder anyone? No, get rid of all the murderers. That's fine. And you're hold on, it's okay to have opinions, but if you don't know why you have those opinions, or you don't have evidence to back up those opinions, or you don't have your answer to why do you think that is to just get offended and tell somebody to mind their own business. Not that I did that all the time. I did that all the fucking time, which is even more ridiculous when you think about the fact that I was also on the debate team. So every weekend I was facts, evidence, I need sources, and every week Sunday I was I don't need evidence or sources of anything. But I think you're right. I so much of the process is changing who you are. You think, oh, I'm never going back to church again, I'm done. And you just don't have any idea that your social, political, physical, emotional thoughts and boundaries have so much room to change and adjust. And it's just going to be years of you figuring out that everything you thought you believed isn't actually what you believe when you really look into it, or when you really take a moment to answer that why question. And it's just, when you're on the other side of it, you're wow, look at how far I've come. This is wonderful. But when you're in it, you just feel like you're eating shit all the time. You just feel
Oh, God, yeah.
why is everybody treating me like I'm wrong 24/7? It's, sweetie, you are. That's okay. It's fine. But you are embarrassing yourself. And it's okay. You gotta, luckily, I had understanding individuals in my life who just asked why a lot over and over again, the one that sticks out in my mind is when all those, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, when all of those celebrities got their nudes leaked, their phones were hacked, and they had
yeah.
And I remember I got on Facebook and was well, if you wouldn't take naked pictures of yourself, you wouldn't have to worry about anybody getting them. So I don't know what their problem is, but they should have thought about this. And luckily I had people in my life that were whoa, they consented to one person having those pictures. They didn't consent to everyone. And the idea of nuanced consent was brand new to me. Just stuff like that where and at the time I never would have connected that to deconstructing from religion. But now I'm oh, that was part of it. That was part of the process.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have to be a very, I don't know. Let me put it this way. I've never seen, never met, and actually can't even conceive of a human being who could be fully aware of and maintain perspective at all times about their own thought processes against some objective standard that's always going to be right for the situation. Give me a break, right? We
Yes.
all screw up at this stuff. But
Yes.
that tendency toward binary thinking, you do outgrow it if you work on it. And this is that discipline factor of coming out of a cult and doing something good for yourself by educating yourself, by informing yourself, by speaking with others, going to support groups or getting some therapy or having a support system of some kind, or having friends, not a bottle or not a drug, not a substance, but a person that you can deal with, and they can be there for you, and or people. And that's how you recover. You don't recover by denying it, by sticking it in a closet, by not talking about it anymore, by pretending it didn't happen, by saying, oh, well, dodged a bullet, guess I'm going to be fine for the rest of my life, as you proceed to step right into another one, right?
Yes.
So there's just no substitute for doing that work. And I think one of the reasons so many people in the ex-cult space are ex-cult members is because there's a certain percentage of us who kind of just kind of get that.
Yeah.
And we're trying to encourage, again, weaponized empaths, right? We're just trying to encourage other people to that they can make things better for themselves. But it's a path, and it's not always an easy one. And it doesn't always necessarily take you where you think you're going to go. That's the funny and exciting thing about it.
Yes.
You don't know what's coming.
No. Christian Sydney would hate atheist Sydney, but atheist Sydney is my favorite Sydney I have ever met. She is a basket of laughs, let me tell you. Do you think that that's why so many people leave cults in their like 40s and 50s as opposed to their early 20s? Because at that age, you're just a lot better at recognizing when you've been wrong for a long time, when 21-year-olds just want to be right all the time.
Yeah, well, there is that. I think that there is no substitute for experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a good way to put it.
It's a sad fact. I mean, you try to do the best you can to communicate to younger people, and sometimes they just are younger people. I was one too. I get it,
Yeah.
and you always have the karmic retribution, right? My brother is going through that right now with his kids, because my brother was a hellion as a kid, and now he calls my mom apologizing constantly because he's like, I had no idea, what I was putting you through. So, there's that whole dynamic. But I think that I think it's individual, really. The age thing is sometimes yes, sometimes no. I've watched lots of people die in the Sea Org of old age. I mean, it doesn't always ring true.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, I can speak to my experience of it and say I had 25 years. I had looked back on my life, and I had helped a lot of people. I had done a lot of good. I was happy with that, but I was not happy with the state of my existence, and I was not happy with the lack of freedoms and choices that I did not have as a Scientologist and Sea Org member. As Janja Lalich puts it, right, the bounded choice model, right? Your choices are limited. And I was feeling restricted, and I was feeling like I needed a change. And I got to a point where I'd been on the fence in one way or another for 10 years on the topic. And I was disillusioned enough with it that I was able to think critically and skeptically about it enough to get myself to go, okay, I think it's time for that change. And I somehow made that work. Again, with the help of my parents as well. A support network makes it 95% easier.
Yeah.
Which is why, groups outside helping people out is so needful and helpful across the spectrum of cults. That's a really important function that some groups serve. So that was my experience of it, was just kind of an emotional malaise and purposelessness, because after that many years, it finally got through to me. This was not going in the direction I wanted it to be going in. And maybe midlife crisis could also partially explain some of that, or So I think there's a lot of factors at play.
You left Scientology and you bought a motorcycle.
Exactly.
All in the same day.
I got my Porsche in the driveway. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I want to be respectful of your time. If you had a message, if one of those, if you take nothing away from anything we've said today, what would you want people to take away? Whether they're experiencing similar things, whether they're considering it.
I would say, I think for your audience, I would want to stress critical thinking and the need for it across the entire spectrum of life.
Mm.
I would say that I was lucky to have Googled my way into the world of skepticism and critical thinking and rationality, and Michael Shermer and Penn and Teller and James Randi and the whole crew, right? All the skeptical
I love James
people.
Randi.
Oh, they're great, right? They're great people. And they invite you to think for yourself. They don't invite you into their little guru group where they tell you what to think. And that was one of the things that I could tell. This is the real deal, because this is not about my compliance. This is about my education and my own ability to make choices. That's what empowerment is. And groups that are cultic only look like they're doing that. And you quickly, if you're paying attention, then you can see the constraints start coming in pretty quickly too. But the denial of those constraints is so easy when you're in that euphoric headspace. And that's why that's the time to be the most aware of what's going on. I think my best piece of advice I've ever given is the simplest. If you're about to make a big decision, wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yep.
I guarantee you, however you feel today, 2 days from now, 3 days from now, you're going to feel different.
Yep.
That's our emotions at play, right? The entire effort of cult recruitment, the commonality every single time is you can't think, you have to feel your way. This feels right. This is the right path for you because you feel it's true. That's how they get you, is through your emotions. So emotional intelligence is where it's at. And that's the best, simplest advice I've been able to give over all these years.
Wow. That statement alone probably just saved somebody listening to this from getting like a Pikachu chest piece.
Right?
But it sounds like it's so cool though. And then 2 days later, they're going to be like, oh, thank God. Thank God. Or don't thank God, depending on who they are.
That's right.
Well, Chris, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I knew it was going to be fun, but I had even more fun than I anticipated. I've loved deep diving with you. I'm already thinking of like other ideas and like episodes and things that like I might pick your brain about. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And for anybody listening, I will have linked to your channel below, and any other sources that you want me to advertise for you, any Spotify links or anything like that, social media accounts, I can include all that. But yeah, this has been wonderful. And thank you for your time. And thank you for giving us your experiences and your wisdom. And I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. Thank you for inviting me. And this was really fun. I am more than happy to come back and talk with you more about this stuff.